I was wondering if you could give us a little tour of your garden.
Absolutely.
It's not just your own compost here, you actually get some from the public, right?
Yeah.
This week we're gonna make our own composter. Hi everyone, my name's Emily Thievery. I'm also known as Ranger M. I'm an environmental educator and communicator, and I get to talk to a lot of different people about all things nature and conservation. I love to knowledge share, and that's what I want to do with you. So come on, let's go learn with Ranger M. Hi everyone, today we're with Urban Roots, a non-for-profit organization that revitalizes unused land in the City of London for agriculture. They have 2 sites, so we're going to start at Siloam, and let's go meet up with 2 of the co-founders, Jeremy and Richie. Thanks for joining me, Richie and Jeremy. Can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you do at Urban Roots?
I am one of the founding members of Urban Roots London, and my main portfolio is growing. And so I'm in charge of some of the crop planting that exists at our Norlan site and at this site, as well as some connections with the city.
I am also one of the founding members of Urban Roots, and primarily I'm dealing with a lot more of the finance and administration side of the organization, helping us sustain ourselves and grow more food in the future.
Can you tell me a bit about where the idea of Urban Roots came from?
It comes from a few different angles because there was 4 of us that founded the organization. So we each had our own kind of inspiration, but part of the inspiration was seeing similar projects to ours in other cities like Detroit, using empty land and growing really productive, healthy food and making it available for people. And so that was really inspiring. We thought London was definitely a place where that could happen as well. But we did also hear that a lot of those organizations were struggling to pay their bills and make ends meet because they were funded entirely by basically municipal governments. So we were looking for a model that could add some financial sustainability as well.
For me personally, it was about getting people food and access to food at a way that really kind of met their needs and wasn't about, the bottom line of us making immense amounts of money. We wanted people to have access to affordable food because we know the impacts that that has on someone's health, mental health, and we wanted to bring people together and connect people to the food that is growing.
Yeah, I saw on your website before I came that you have a 3-tier system. So can you explain that a bit more for anyone who doesn't know about Urban Roots?
Yeah, go ahead,
Sure.
Richard.
Yeah. So the model of thirds that we developed is basically 1/3 of our produce is always donated and no less, sometimes more. And that's to our community partners. So for example, Crouch Resource Center Hamilton Road has been a partner since the very beginning. So they use the produce for whatever programming that they need in their community. And then the second third is our affordable tier, and we've been selling that at farmers markets at our site and other locations around the city. So at rates that are generally cheaper than what you get at a discount grocery store. And then the final third is what we sell to restaurants in the city that support what we're doing at a regular full wholesale price for organic vegetables.
Yeah, and the unique part about the model is that, as Richie said, that no less than 1/3 with our community partners that's donated is actually the same produce that our chefs would order. So it's not like our leftovers. It's that same nutrient-rich, healthy produce that our chefs actually crave, right? And so it's about supporting those community organizations that are already doing good work in the community by getting them food to support their programming.
Have you seen any drawbacks or any changes to your farm because of the pandemic?
Over the last little while, we've looked at how people are accessing food, and a lot of people have been really focusing on kind of delivery. So there's even more distance between, kids thinking food comes from a grocery store to now food gets delivered to you. So in our conversations with our community partners, we looked at how do we get food directly to people, as well as support the building of communities outside of kind of our farm area. And some of our community partners have established what they call a neighborhood market, where they are getting access to people within their community so that everyone can kind of come together, celebrate around food, and around each other.
I really enjoy the connection you make for people and the food. Like you really build on the connection of where people can see their food is coming from. Do you think that draws a lot of people to your programming?
Yeah, I think that everything is interconnected, right? I mean, we as humans are very connected to each other and very connected to the environment and to our earth. And the plants benefit from that, and we benefit from the plants. And so it's really about this reciprocal relationship in how we even farm, in looking at ecological practices and really making sure that we're using what's around us, beneficial insects, plants, to be able to grow better, healthier food and more production.
We've made an intentional choice to focus on, as Jeremy's saying, the people aspect, and that includes kind of the labor aspect of agriculture, which is something that is vastly undervalued in our current system. And it's also really easy to just be drawn into kind of make big capital investments in really, new fancy technology, which isn't necessarily a bad thing on its own, but we often forget what does that mean for the kind of care that goes into the work and the vegetables that come from that kind of production. So we've really made an intentional choice to kind of pour into and invest in labor as a first priority, rather than the other options you might have to invest in.
I was wondering if you could give us a little tour of your garden.
Absolutely.
How much produce in weight does Urban Roots grow at the siloam site? A, 500 pounds, B, 2,500 pounds, C, 3,000 pounds, or D, 15,000 pounds? How much produce in weight does Urban Roots grow at the siloam site? Urban Roots produce approximately 3,000 pounds at the siloam site.
So as you can see, we have this area laid out in what we would call field blocks. So essentially they are squares that are about 34 by 34 feet. And we have little beds that are inside of each of these field blocks that are about 30 inches wide. Pathways are about 15 to 18 inches, and so we'll grow in the beds. You can see that we have a lot of cool season crops still in the ground because it's getting to that time of year where things are getting cooler. We did end up planting some later fall carrots. Hopefully, weather cooperates and they will come to be nice and large. The hardest
vegetable.
They are. They take a long time to germinate, and we have some pretty good germination rates here. So we have 6 field blocks that allow us to be able to rotate our crops accordingly to really have a good soil nutrition and ensure that the crops aren't taking too much from the soil that we have and actually allow for soil to recover and recuperate.
The different plants do different things to the soil? Is that what you mean?
They do.
Absolutely.
Rotate? So some of the plants are heavier feeders. So essentially they're going to take more from the soil, more nutrients from the soil, and we want to be able to balance that appropriately. And that's about working with the plants, the soil, the life that's in that soil to be able to have healthy crops and minimize pests. Okay. So we have a perennial area over here where we have some herbs that are going to be growing, and then we planted some annual flowers. Not only does it create a warm, inviting space to have lots of flowers around, but it brings beneficial birds and insects as well. And we wanted to make sure that it's a balanced approach to growing here. Even though this site is much smaller than our Norlan site, we wanted to get as much as we can from the environment to grow a lot of food. So we have kale, radishes, lettuce, beets, as I said, carrots, chard. The farm crew is currently picking beans and pole beans. Our pole beans got knocked over by a couple of raccoons.
No.
But the beans continue to grow because that's what they do, and so we're having to do a lot of work to get under there to pick up all those beans. So over here you can see that the farm crew is basically working the top inch or two of the soil. So we are broad forking to allow for the soil to not be so compacted. They're kind of raking it out to make sure that they're getting any rocks, any sort of weeds, which are really just plants we don't want growing in the field, out of there, because we are going to be planting a fall cover crop. So essentially green is better than brown. So we want to be able to not only plant to allow for some carbon capture, but also for what it's going to do for the soil. So we have a daikon radish, which will essentially grow really long and aerate the soil. So kind of really help break up that soil because it's really compact. This is only our second year that's going to be growing next year. So we want to make sure that we have prepared the site to be able to be as productive as it was this year. There'll also be peas and oats that are going to be sown in there this week, and it will winter kill, which means it's going to die over the winter. but we will be planting some garlic into that. So we'll get a good, couple of inches before it won't really grow anymore, and we'll plant our garlic directly into that to allow for those things to kill over the winter, add organic matter and life to that soil, but it also provide a matting and a covering to not allow weeds to really germinate as much, so that the garlic can kind of really sprout in the spring and take off.
So the winter kill, the stuff that dies, do you remove it or do you rotate it in the spring?
So we're gonna leave it and just leave it as a mat, because a lot of it is gonna be there. So we have at times mowed it down, but the idea is to disturb the soil as little as possible.
Okay.
So essentially we will probably mow it and then transplant whatever it is that it's going into those blocks when we do our farm planning directly in there, so that we're not disturbing all that life that's underneath that soil.
Well, thank you so much for showing us your farm. I just kind of wanted to know how someone could help out with your program.
Great. So we have volunteering opportunities. So as much as Richie had mentioned before, we want to pay people for the work. We've reached a level of, I guess, a point in our organization where we're able to pay people for the work that's done, whereas previously we were a volunteer-driven organization. So over the last couple of years, we've been able to really work hard towards paying people a living wage to do that work. But it means that there's still lots of other volunteer opportunities on the farm that can create meaningful engagement, not only with the plants, but with people, with the environment, and what people need. So they can choose how they want to volunteer. So I know today we have a volunteer out and they're helping with harvesting. We also have a lot of farm crew out today, which is nice. Typically what you would do is reach out to our volunteer coordinator and you can find different ways to help out. At this site, there are no more real volunteer opportunities because we are winding this site down, as much as there's some stuff in here. All of this work that's being done is really in preparation for next year, but there are opportunities at our Norlan site.
Do you guys run on like donations, or what kind of, like, can people financially help at all?
Absolutely, there are many ways. So we have an annual harvest dinner, which is our main fundraising event, essentially. We do give tours and have groups that come out to support. We have educational opportunities on the farm, and absolutely people can come and buy our produce, and more than willing to take donations if people are able to do that. We also have some merchandise, as you can see, Urban Roots shirts and tote bags, working with some other local organizations to be able to support the work that they're doing. So it's all about that connections that we have.
So you guys have 2 sites now. What's really important when picking a new site?
We've had many opportunities to grow in other spaces. And one of the main things that we pride ourselves on is, if we're going to start something, we want to make sure that it's healthy soil. We've come across several sites within London that have had some challenges with contaminants and heavy metals that I think people, and I know for myself, I didn't really understand all of that stuff prior to really working with Urban Roots to figure this stuff out. So knowledge is really important in understanding that the soil is going to be one of the, your biggest investment. And so to start out with some clean soil that's not contaminated is super important. And so doing your research on an area, if you're going to be doing that, is crucial. So when we developed this site, that was the first thing we did before any sort of memorandum of understanding on how we develop a partnership with Siloam United Church, is can we test the soil? And everything came back, within the appropriate levels as far as any sort of contaminants or heavy metals, and there was no concerns there. The next piece was nutrient levels, to look at what are we dealing with in the soil and how do we kind of really help support healthy soil within London.
And I want to thank you again, Jeremy and Richie, for having me here and giving me a tour. But I know you have another site, and I want to go check that out.
Great.
Which food scrap shouldn't be composted? A, bread, B, olives, C, bacon grease, or D, grass clippings? Which food scrap shouldn't be composted? You shouldn't compost bacon grease or any other meat byproducts. Meat byproducts cause your composter to smell and will attract more wildlife. Hi Hi Ben, thanks for joining us. We're now at the Norlan site, which is considerably bigger than your siloam site. And I think it really puts the name urban in Urban Roots, seeing Highbury right there.
Indeed.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself and what you do for Urban Roots?
Yeah, so I'm the farm manager here at Urban Roots. I'm in charge of day-to-day operations and crop planning for the next year. So yeah, it's pretty much my role here. I manage the staff along with all the crops here.
So we can thank you for all the tasty vegetables.
Us and the staff, yeah.
I read on your website and I've heard a lot about your composting program and how it's not just your own compost here, you actually get some from the public, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a bit about it?
Yeah, so we do have a bin that's just out on the street side there where the community is welcome to bring their kitchen scraps, and then we incorporate that into our food or our composting program. We think it's really important to divert as much organic material away from landfills as possible, as that's a major contributor to global warming.
And I understand there is a bit of overwintering that happens here, if I take these dome things to be correct.
Yeah.
Do you mind showing us them and telling a bit about them?
Yeah, this is the first year that we're going to be doing some major overwintering. Usually we close down for 2 to 3 months. This year we're aiming for just 1 month of no production. So we're going to be using the hoop houses along with some low tunnels inside of the hoop houses to further insulate the crops to grow some cold hardy crops like turnip, kale, spinach, things like that. So yeah, it's pretty exciting.
Let's go check it out. So I see you have a lot of tomatoes. Is that mostly what's going to be in this dome?
So we put our indeterminate tomatoes inside of our hoop houses here with the theme of season extension in mind. Indeterminate tomatoes will produce continually until the weather gets too cold, and by putting them in the hoop house we're able to season extend by a month or 2 months even to get a bigger crop. So once the tomatoes are done, we will be removing them, and then this will also be planted with things like turnip and spinach, as I was saying, and then the low tunnels will go over those crops.
Okay,
Yeah.
Very cool. Would you mind showing us your composting site?
You got it.
All right, so obviously these are your composting piles.
Indeed, yeah. We have one in the curative phase, so this stuff has already been broken down, and we're leaving that to kind of finish up so we can spread it on our field. And then this is our active pile that we're adding all of the kitchen scraps that the community donates to us currently.
What can the community donate and what can't they donate?
So no like meat or animal products, but all sorts of other kind of vegetative kitchen scraps are welcome. A lot of people think that compostable plastic bags are good for compost. They do break down, but they just turn into microplastic. So I don't love when those are added to the compost, and we do tend to remove them.
What about like paper bags?
Paper bags are totally fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. What about bread products?
Yeah, we actually have a partner in a whole grain hearth, and all of their kind of stale stuff they donate, and we chip it up so it's not sitting as a big loaf in there, but we are able to deal with bread products.
I see a lot of wasps and flies all over. You were mentioning that this happens when you leave your like food material on top. So
Yeah.
do you cover it?
So in a compost pile, you want an optimal ratio of green material to brown material, and your green material is your nitrogen-rich material, while your brown material is your carbon-rich material. And just as a rule of thumb, you want about a 2-inch layer of greens to about a 6-inch layer of browns, and you want to alternate those layers as you're building your pile. And the wasps will get to it when you leave your greens exposed. So we've got some watermelons and things like that wasps love. So we have started covering it back up, and we try to stay on top of that as we're adding our green material.
Speaking of wasps, I hear you guys have some beehives,
Yes.
and I would love to check them out.
Let's do it.
So these are your beehives. Are you ever nervous to be close to them?
No, honeybees are generally pretty docile. I've participated in the harvest of the honey one time, and it's a pretty cool experience. You actually can kind of feel in the air how the bees are feeling almost. You smoke them, as you might know, to make them more docile. But as you disturb the hive, they kind of swarm a little bit more. But if you smoke them correctly, they really do remain docile. as you can see, there's bees flying kind of all around us right now, and I personally feel pretty calm and sensing the vibe that it's pretty calm. So yeah, it's pretty neat that way.
You can find Urban Roots Community Composting Program at which site? At Norlan Ave or the Siloam Church on Fanshawe Park Road. You can find Urban Roots Community Composting Program at which site? You can find the Urban Roots Community Composting Program at the Norlan Ave site. This program allows Urban Roots to reuse our food waste and divert it from our landfills. Thank you, Ben, for having me here. I just have one final question. I just want to know, do you guys have any plans for Norlan site?
Yeah, so we're gonna continue growing the things that we have for the most part. We're gonna pare down some of the varieties of various crops that we have while expanding the cultural diversity of our crops. And we're gonna focus more on pollinators as well, getting some more wildflowers to grow as well.
That's awesome. I want to thank you again. I had so much fun exploring both sites and learning more about Urban Roots. If you do want to get involved in Urban Roots, there is an opportunity to volunteer, and you can email the volunteer coordinator. And if you want to contribute in other ways, you can always purchase their produce. They have markets on Wednesday and Sundays. And then you can also bring your compost here. And that's just one easy way to help out the amazing program and activities happening with Urban Roots. So thanks for joining me this week, and I'll see you in nature. This week we're going to make our own composter. So the materials you need is a container, a power drill, or something to make holes into your container. You're going to need brown material, which is either paper or cardboard from inside your house, or you can use leaf debris or even lawn clippings for the brown debris. Then you're going to want soil to get your composter started, and then obviously your food scraps. So the first step is taking your container and flipping it over, and we're going to drill holes into the base of the container. This kind of depends on the size of your container. I'm going to put about 6 holes in mine, but it goes until about like 10 holes depending on the size of your container. It's just for airflow through the composter. Then once that's done, we're going to make our first layer, which is the brown layer. So I'm using shredded paper, but again, you can use leaves or lawn clippings, even cut up cardboard. This is gonna fill about 1/8 of your container. And now we're gonna add soil. Once you add enough soil, it's gonna be about halfway full of your container. Then your final layer is your food scraps. Once you have that all in, we're gonna mix it. You wanna mix to the point where most of your food scraps are covered. Next, we want to put a little bit of water in it. We don't want it soaking wet, we just want the dirt and everything damp. Going to mix it again. Next, we want to drill the final couple holes in our lid. I'm gonna drill about 6 more holes on the lid, and that's once again for airflow. Now your composter is ready. You want to find a location in your backyard, or if you're in an apartment, you can just leave it on your patio. You do kind of want to find a shadier spot for your composter, as full sun would dry out your composter. And you want to make sure it's not in a spot that'll get too wet. So if a lot of water comes off your roof, you don't want your composter right underneath there. The more water in your composter, the more it will smell. You can put any fruit or veggie scraps in it, bread, eggs, coffee grinds or tea grinds, and then as well as leaf litter or lawn clippings. So you don't want meat, dairy, bones, grease, stuff like that. And then that way your composter will do well, it won't attract wildlife, and it won't smell.